Black Swan author Nelson Taleb, who correctly called the 2008 financial crisis, says the U.S. is in a death spiral over government debt. That is his opinion. I would concur with that assessment. I would add that very soon, the world as we currently know it will change forever, in my opinion. So, two important issues I wanted to address in this video. Number one, consumer debt binge reaches an ominous and historic fever pitch. And number two, record number of people in the U.S. are homeless amid continuing surge in rent costs. Now, I talked about this in a lot of other videos. I want to go a little deeper in this. This goes deeper than it's the landlord's fault. So is the American economy running out of gas? Maybe. So the fake economy, ladies and gentlemen, right now we have, 330 million people in the U.S., so 165 million Americans out of 330, roughly, only have $400 in savings. More than 60% of Americans now live paycheck to paycheck. In a first world country that's supposed to be the richest country in the world, we take care of our people. And many of them are struggling just to pay their monthly bills, let alone having anything extra for, let's say, a rainy day emergency. You get one emergency, it's lights out, baby. It's lights out. Now, in the last couple of years, 228 million credit card accounts opened up in the last 2 years. What does that tell you? For many, the only way to continue surviving in this hellscape is to go into debt. The latest federal data from the Federal Reserve shows that consumer borrowing increased much faster than expected in December, which saw higher spending than normal. Cost of living in the United States is so out of control that consumers are going into debt like never before in the nation's history. The historic debt, binge seemingly has no end in sight. Remember, it's all transitory, especially because of the increasingly harsh economic environment that is making it next to impossible for many people to continue making, ends meet. What's contributed to this right out of the bat, I'm not a fan of Republicans or Democrats, but when the new administration got into office, Joe Biden signed an executive order and cut off the U.S. energy. That's killing us. So housing costs are through the roof for many. Employers are laying off workers in record numbers. Early 23, I did a talk of tech industry laying off 60,000 people. Americans, America's southern border is wide open to limitless asylum seekers who are displacing and replacing American citizens. 100% fact. Where does it all end? The U.S. consumers did not rein in their spending this past holiday season and now have near record-breaking debt balances to show for it. A lot of reports are showing, consumer borrowing spiked by $23.75 billion in November, more than doubling economists' expectations for a $9 billion increase and sending outstanding credit balances north, ladies and gentlemen, of $5 trillion mark for the first time on record. So right now you have higher rates of revolving credit, mostly from credit cards, are behind on their monthly increase in borrowing that occurred in December, soaring by nearly $19.5 billion. That represents the third highest monthly increase on record since 1943. So, and a lot of these interest rates are going to change at the end of this year, next year. 20-30% interest rates on credit cards. So, though rapidly rising debt levels have, not yet become unmanageable, so to speak, this is changing as the debt crisis is leading to my opinion, the country's going to go off a financial cliff. Credit card usage and buy now, pay later usage seemingly surged during the holidays, if you know where to look for this stuff, on top of already hefty debt loads. And you can read this through analyst reports, bank rate, for example. So looking back at what happened in 2012 when the country was just coming out, if you remember, coming out of what came to be dubbed as the Great Recession, even what happened then, in my opinion, pales in comparison to the nightmare that is unfolding today as credit card rates have reached an all-time high. And a lot of them are flipping over at the end of this year with an average of more than 20%. So credit card rates are also rising at a steepest annual pace ever since aligning with the Federal Reserve's interest rate hike cycle, if you remember. So people are going to get squeezed big time. Most cardholders' rates have risen 5.25 percentage points during the span as a result of the Fed's rate hikes, uh, meant to combat inflation, which we all know has not worked, as I said, for over 8 months in my videos. So it's no wonder that we are seeing more people carrying more debt for longer periods of time. In my opinion, it's only going to get worse. A recent survey found that a whopping 56 million credit card holders in the U.S. have been carrying balances for at least a year. Roughly half of them are now carrying debt more month to month on at least one card to two. The average person has 3 or 4 cards. So it is expected that things will worsen dramatically in 24 and greater in 25, just like a lot of these loans coming due in the commercial sector. Bloodbath. So an economic downturn, as they are calling it, is sure to manifest through, many would argue that based on pre-pandemic metrics, the U.S. has already been in a recession for some time now. I would agree with that. 2 consecutive negative quarters of growth, 10 plus times since World War II. It's always been a recession. We're in a recession. So I talked earlier, let's look at homelessness. Poverty and homelessness are becoming the norm rather than the exception right now. So unprecedented increase in homelessness, as well as, the oldest age, for the medium renter. Housing costs have continued to soar in the U.S. following the COVID-19 pandemic, and the wages in the U.S. have not been able to keep up with those costs. Wages have been stagnant for over 40 years, ladies and gentlemen, in a first world, supposedly richest country in the world. Our Congress people aren't doing their job. So as a result, the U.S. is experiencing an unprecedented percentage of homelessness, and especially since COVID. And so don't blame, we talk about your landlord. A large percentage of landlords, and I've talked about this when we talk about rent, have mortgages as well as increased maintenance costs due to inflation. The cost of running a building, and then inflation is killing small-time landlords as well. Like I've always said, blame those damn politicians on K Street, So rates of homelessness have increased in the U.S. by 12% from the year 2022 to 2023, and it increased by 48%, ladies and gentlemen, since 2015. And that's according to a January report from Harvard's Joint Center of Housing. So it's backed up. So about 653,000 people were reported experiencing homelessness in January of 2023. That is the highest single year increase for rates of homelessness in the U.S. And trust me, it's a lot higher. In the first years of the pandemic, renter protections, protecting renters, especially in California, income supports and housing assistance helped starve off considerable rise in homelessness. But now it's all coming. It's all coming big time. So many of these protections ended in 2022 at a time when rents were rising rapidly. Increasing numbers of migrants were prohibited from working. And as a result, the number of people experiencing homelessness jumped by nearly 71,000 in just 1 year. And it's a lot more than that, in my opinion. The states of, if you look at Tennessee, Ohio, Arizona, and Texas, have seen an increase in the number of unsheltered people in their state amid skyrocketing inflation that failed to keep up with workers' wages. Like I said, wages have been stagnant for 40 years. It's pathetic. So, the rental markets are rapidly cooling a little bit after a period of significant overheating. You got to look at this stuff regionally, not holistically. I've always said that. Rent growth has almost completely stopped following historically high rent increase in 2021 and 22. While the slowdown is a welcome change for renters, asking rents still remain well above pre-pandemic levels. So if you look at the data, mean in the United States, median rent in the U.S. was roughly $1,064 in December of 2023, which is about 23% increase from before the COVID-19 pandemic. Inflation adjusted weekly earnings for the median worker rose just 1.7% between 2019 and 2023. That's according to government data. It's pathetic. So in addition, the report found that roughly 3.9 million renter households lived in homes that did not meet basic standards for suitability and safety in 2021. The median age of renter-occupied homes also reached the oldest of any other, recorded time in 2021 at the age of 44. So, we'll use some of the quantitative data. When I was looking at this Harvard report, the Biden administration has made additional federal resources available to reduce homelessness, which included $3.1 billion through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Developments. You got to really track that money where it goes, though, folks. But I would add this, and the report stated this, adds that more affordable housing and rent subsidies will be needed to prevent further homelessness. And I've been actively involved in this, and I will tell you that a lot of these folks, and I've met with, they don't want to follow through, and they don't want to lose their six-figure job. They're there to solve the problem, but they don't want to solve it because they want to keep that nice job, in my opinion. The politicians are not doing enough to address the issue, and I have firsthand knowledge of this, trying to get involved with these city councils in downtown LA, talk to people in Austin and in Venice Beach. It's not nice. So when you look at the work done by Congress, it's just coming to terms with the housing problem. Mayors around the country are talking about the trend, but they're not doing anything to make affordable housing easier to get. They just want to keep their nice salary, like I said, and do nothing to solve the problem. And I know a few of the mayors, and I will say this, the mayor in Gardena I met with for lunch in California, and affordable housing can be done, when it's done correctly, it can be nice, but you got to be careful where you're putting it with residential. There's some issues going on in Yorba Linda with increased crime, and where they set up affordable housing and, drug use. But if it's done correctly, and I went to a few developments where they had retail shops, housing above affordable housing, and you're not mixing it in with the residential housing, you're kind of keeping it isolated. And it can be, when it's done correctly, it can look nice in the aesthetics and all these things. But when it's not done correctly, it can wreak havoc, and you're going to piss off a lot of neighbors in the community. So I think it has to be done strategically around the U.S. I'm not saying it's not needed, but it has to be done strategically. And when we talk, the homelessness, there's a lot of issues going on with no one wants to talk about it, mental illness and drug use and these things that, people don't want to deal with. So these are the two main issues I want to address today with regards to kind of where the economy is going holistically. Because when you see these benchmarks and where they're going with credit card debt, yes, the jobs report just came out, but there's a lot of, and I've talked about this jobs report, and I'm not going to get into it, how you look at part-time jobs, people with 2 to 3 jobs. We had the greatest number of tech jobs lost in early 23, 60,000. Those were six-figure jobs, and more jobs were lost. They're not being reported. I'm looking at the layoff reports of major corporations laying off thousands of people. So there's a lot of things going on right now. It's an election year. It's going to get ugly because both sides are playing dirty. And I'm not a fan of either party right now, the Republicans or Democrats. It's shameful what they're doing to this country. We are the richest country in the world. There should be no homelessness. Go to Saudi Arabia and go to Dubai. Go to some other countries that I've been to and see how they run their countries. It's disgusting. And more people need to become aware of this. And maybe we've got to hit rock bottom for people to start waking up and knocking on the Capitol door and knocking on your city council's door and say, what are you guys doing making all this money to help the community? But you need to get more involved in your communities, in my opinion, and make a difference. And I've been bad at that, and I need to do a better job of that as well. Take care. Have a great weekend.